I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 190 on the podcast today. So today we wanted to take some time to share with you some updates and a general overview of Collider's own Ecosystem Navigator program. So on the podcast today, I sit down with my colleague at Collider, Jamie Sundsbak, to share with you some information to bring everyone up to speed about an exciting new program that we're getting ready to launch here in the Rochester ecosystem very soon, called the Ecosystem Navigator program. So on the podcast today, we talk about our journey to basically start Collider as a nonprofit and get our initial funding, which went directly to support this Ecosystem Navigator program through the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. We talk about what the Ecosystem Navigator program is and how it developed from our own experiences trying to navigate, find resources, and find a network within the Rochester entrepreneurial ecosystem, and how through this program we want to make sure that all entrepreneurs in the ecosystem are heard. So we talk about the different phases of the Ecosystem Navigator program. The first phase was the listening phase, which has been completed. And the second phase, which you're in right now, we just started, is an activation phase, where we're actively recruiting Ecosystem Navigators and we'll have them fully engaged in the community by mid-October. So on the podcast today, we chat about what an Ecosystem Navigator is, which, just to give you a teaser, there are 3 individuals that will serve within the Rochester ecosystem in a culturally competent manner and make sure that entrepreneurs in the community have a network and framework to increase their chances of success in their business endeavor. Right now, Collider's actively in the process of hiring for Ecosystem Navigator program, and actually the application to be an Ecosystem Navigator will close on Friday. So we've had some wonderful conversations with some really amazing individuals in Rochester to date, and they've made it a very hard decision, but we're going to have to make one. But tune in today as you hear more about our Ecosystem Navigator program and hear a little bit of the origin story of Collider as a nonprofit. So stay tuned. So today you're listening into one of our great podcasts, the Rochester Rising podcast, where we talk primarily with Rochester entrepreneurs to amplify the stories of business development and entrepreneurship taking place in Rochester, Minnesota. Rochester Rising is the storytelling arm of Collider, which is a Rochester-based nonprofit that supports Rochester entrepreneurs. So one big thing you all can do to help out with the Rochester Rising podcast, if you're listening today, if you enjoy what you're hearing, please subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening in and rate us. If you're listening in on YouTube, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel, to like this video, and wherever you're listening in on your favorite podcatcher, we'd also love for you to subscribe and rate our podcast so that others can find it and so we can keep this as a sustainable part of our business model. So that would be a huge help. A reminder to everyone as well is that Rochester Rising has a second podcast now called Ecosystem North. On the Ecosystem North podcast, we chat with entrepreneurial ecosystem builders to understand what drives them to serve entrepreneurs within our community. That podcast airs every Friday, and you can find it as well on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Rochester Rising YouTube channel, as well as on our Rochester Rising website. So we would encourage everyone to subscribe and to rate our podcast wherever you listen in. All right, so now on to the podcast today with myself and Jamie Sundsbak, talking more about Collider's Ecosystem Navigator program. So maybe probably the best way to start, I think, is to talk overall about this project that we're doing through the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. So maybe I'll let you take that one. So do you want to talk about, if you remember, like the timeline of when we found this grant and what that kind of process was like working with the Kaufman Foundation?
So I guess I will never be quoted on like dates because I don't quite remember them. So I would say at some point, obviously, Colliders had a close relationship with the Kaufman Foundation through its participation in 1 Million Cups, as well as just going and attending these great events like eShip. So we've always kept a very, an eye on what's coming out of Kaufman. And, we started out Collider as a for-profit co-working space, and then we sort of pivoted into this nonprofit. So we were looking for funding sources, and it was just kind of almost like it was destined to be. Although I don't think either one of us thought at the time it was, but they pushed out this Inclusion Open RFP, and basically the concept of Inclusion Open, as I understand it, was the acknowledgement, and this is before many of the events that have happened in the last 6 to 7 months, the acknowledgement that our entrepreneurship is something that we always say should be for everyone, but realistically is not. There's a lot of barriers to entrepreneurship from underrepresented communities in the United States, and I really have to acknowledge the work that Kaufman's done to surface a lot of that, and really putting their money where their mouth was, right, and saying this is an issue, and instead of Kaufman coming up with, say, best practices and things like that, they really unleashed a wave of funding to allow 20 different organizations across the United States to kind of come up with methods that may work and hopefully are able to be then reproduced nationally to, increase inclusion, diversity, and equity amongst these underrepresented entrepreneurs. So I thought that was an interesting idea, and it aligned a lot with our mission to really create a healthy and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Rochester. So, Amanda, you and I are grant writers by trade, right? Coming out of the NIH for grants for science, and so we thought, hey, let's take a stab at this. And I don't think either one of us really thought it would work, especially being a brand new organization. I thought that would be kind of a black mark against us. There was really no track record of what we had done as a nonprofit. But we sat down, and I think, how long did we spend? It was a solid month, I would guess, of our time.
Yeah, I was trying to think of this timeline while we were talking here. I think we started looking at this in January of last year, so January 2019, and we had always kind of been, so I guess Collider and Rochester Rising had started about, I want to say maybe 3.5 years prior to that as for-profit organizations, which, looking back on it, they probably always should have been nonprofit organizations, because the mission was always like education and connection. And how do you monetize that? I mean, I know a lot of people are thinking, well, you couldn't charge for classes, but again, we're talking about inclusivity, barriers to entrepreneurship. Realistically, what will we have to charge for a class to be, for the time that you put in for a class and to make that sustainable? Like, a decent amount. So that's a huge barrier to people. So there's not always a simple revenue, a business model structure for these things. And the nonprofit route really made the most sense, but it's a lot slower to get started than for-profit. So that's why we originally did that. But I think going back to how long did we write this for, I want to say, at least 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, it was pretty, it was a pretty in-depth planning process, I would say. And, I think especially with budgets and stuff, we didn't really have a lot of experience doing that as a nonprofit. So I think that was the largest time. But yeah, I just remember writing these out on like huge whiteboards and things like that in winter. So I think I'm pretty sure it was January.
Yeah, and I just remember, I think, I would say roughly for the first sort of round of this funding, it was about a month. And I'm not talking about, off and on. I'm talking like a solid month of work. And I think it really was. And it was very I could always say this in hindsight. It was very illuminating for me because I had come from the sort of hard sciences world where grant writing for the life sciences is a little bit different than this sort of grant writing process, and learning a lot about uh, just that process and how things translate to me was surprising, and I actually thought it was pretty darned effective. Um, but it was tough, but I knew that if we could put something together that was compelling, my biggest wish is we would make the second round, and then we would walk away and say, all right, it's our first grant submission. Um, that's okay. That's a win, and let's move on and look for other funding sources. But the thing with Kaufman is, once you get into say that next round, which we ultimately did, then there's more paperwork, and you go from sort of this great idea, and then it starts to really focus in on details. It's like, how are you actually going to do this? What is this going to cost? And it gets a little more busy again. So I would say that second round, we probably put in 3 weeks of work
Yeah.
to address that. And I remember when we were doing that, it was kind of like, yeah, well, this is it. Why are we even doing this? I'm glad we did. It started to get real when we got to the third round. Um, Obviously, Kaufman had a big interest in us. They were reaching out to us. I think they liked that pragmatic style that we had about really doing the work and the research by going into communities and listening. That was probably, I'm guessing, something they don't get a whole lot. Uh, so we kept seeing the numbers go down. So I think the first group of applicants, or the overall, there was, I think, 1,000 applicants for this, which is crazy. And then they kept cutting it down and cutting it down and cutting it down, and we ended up, I think it was the top, if I'm right, 30. I think was at the very end,
I
30
can't
or 50.
remember. Yeah,
I can't
I think it was
remember.
30. Yeah.
And we knew that they were going to take up to 20 groups that had submitted this grant. So, I mean, those odds aren't horrible. And that's when I started to get very excited. But um, at the same time, we had a great sponsor, a fiscal sponsor in Ready, who stepped up and said, we hadn't received our 501c3 status at that point from the IRS. So Ready stepped up as a great help to us in offering to be our fiscal sponsor for the grant. And then, we basically spent the next couple of months um, working on that final submission, and at the same time working on our 501c3 submission to the IRS, which
I'm
was
waiting.
I learned a lot about dealing with the IRS. It's something I hope none of you ever have to do, but when you do, there's a certain process to do it, and I think it's super valuable to learn that at some point. Um, Really, what it boils down to is use your fax machine. If you don't have one, you're going to need one, or you're going to need some sort of online faxing mechanism, because that's the only way they want any sort of stuff sent to them. But I think then when we finally heard we had received the grant, first of all, I think we had like a little mini celebration. And then the funny thing was that the same day we received our first check from the Kaufman Foundation for the first installment of this grant was the same exact day. In fact, it was the next letter underneath that we received our 501c3. So that was a crazy time. And I just, it was a lot of work, and I wish people could understand how much time gets put into this stuff, because it's really a lot of work. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that and say that, as much work as really executing on a grant is, there's so much, I almost sometimes feel that as much time is spent actually trying to put it together and really basing it on, I think, something that's worked for us for many years, which is this idea of listening first and connecting people to resources. That's what, I feel I do best. I don't have the answers to everything, but I can probably find someone to help you. It's stuff like that I think really is the heart and soul of what we're doing with this grant, and having the responsibility and the honor to be able to extend this, um, into the broader Rochester community, I think is fantastic, and it really gets me excited about what's coming up next.
I think if we take a step back, so the whole program was supposed to be, the whole program was dedicated towards this pilot project that we're calling Ecosystem Navigators, and emphasizing this is a pilot. So, the idea was that we started out saying there'd be 5 ecosystem navigators. We've recently narrowed that down to 3. We understood that the time commitment they could have was so little based on the funding. But anyway, these navigators were supposed to, through this program, they were individuals who lived in Rochester, were connected in with community. And the idea with these navigators is that they would basically meet with entrepreneurs in Rochester, understand what their business was, talk about who they are as a person, and really understand, like, what does that person need next to move themselves forward, either their business forward or themselves as a person, and then to connect them into that resource. So they are not at all business consultants. And I think that's been one of the largest misconceptions about this program that we've had to educate around, but they're more community connectors. So they're listening, they're engaging, they're connecting, and they're referring to, let's say it's a business class. Let's say the entrepreneur really needs to talk to somebody at Ready or the Chamber or Diversity Council. So that navigator would make that connection, refer the entrepreneur into that service in the community, and make sure that the entrepreneur's needs were heard. That's one of the most important parts too, to make sure that connection was made, to make sure that resource responded, and to make sure that it was the right resource. So, like we were talking about, we understood that there were gaps in connection in the community. There were gaps with a lot of underserved, historically and systemically excluded populations and individuals that weren't being served. And, entrepreneurship is a great way to improve your economic outlook, your future. And everybody should get a chance to do that. And our community here our entrepreneurial community is young and it's small. So there's no reason why the community can't be set up to serve more people in an improved way.
I think the concept for what we were trying to do came about largely as, basically it came from our experience. I think the both of us in the entrepreneurial community. I think, both of us started here in Rochester with it was very difficult to connect to resources or even learn what resources were available in the community. And if you can think of someone like me, who I always called the bald, fat white guy, if I'm having trouble, I can't imagine. So basically you think of someone who's, first or second generation who has issues. Definitely English is not their first language. They're struggling to maybe command English, but maybe they have a great idea for a business and they're definitely not getting served. They're not getting those connections to resources in our community. So I think we took a very valuable lesson and something that we're learning even now as we're hiring our ecosystem navigators is I felt I was never listened to as an entrepreneur. So what we wanted to do, and this is baked into the sort of the culture at Collider as well, is really listen to the entrepreneur first. And so what we wanted to do was, I guess it comes from our position as researchers. So phase 1 of this was really all about going out and listening to entrepreneurs. So, Amanda, you took that on and you said, I want to, really take and run with this and listen to our entrepreneurs. And I was really happy that Kaufman also was excited about that, because typically when I see a lot of these grants, it's, we have program X and now we're going to put program X in the Latino population, or we're going
Right.
to, just parachute these things in. And, Kaufman allowed us sort of a research phase for the last 8 months where we were able to go out and actually listen to entrepreneurs, to ecosystem support organizations and say, hey, what are your needs? What are your gaps? What problems are you having? And then we could take all that and analyze it, and then come up with solutions that fit those needs that we're hearing, but also take that information and be very transparent with our community to really then serve in the role of a convener, to get these various groups together, to get our community together, to have these discussions about how we can better support everyone in the community. I think that was, that came from our experience and maybe our own lessons here in the community as budding entrepreneurs. And so that's what I think really got us excited about doing this.
Like you were saying, Jamie, the first phase of this was really going out and listening to people in the community, service providers, as well as entrepreneurs in Rochester. That took about from November through March. So whatever that was, 6 months or so. And really we want to understand, from these conversations, at this point in time, how did the entrepreneurs think that the community was serving them? How did they think it wasn't serving them? It was set up kind of to be more of a gaps analysis than an assets analysis, but we did actually end up uncovering assets too, which is saying something about the strength of some of these resources in the community. But yeah, I think that was one of the most time-consuming phases, was going out, connecting with all these people, having those conversations, and yeah. But it was fun. We met a lot of new people, a lot of people we had never talked with before, being really intentional to push beyond who we knew, and then beyond that next circle and that next circle and that next circle. So out of those conversations, what was kind of surprising to you and what was not surprising that you can recall?
I guess I could start with what wasn't super surprising is, I've spent a lot of time talking to people, and definitely not sort of the target audience that you reached in your work, or by and large, but I knew there were going to be some gaps. There were going to be some frustrations on really access to resources that people need, coming from these underrepresented groups. I definitely knew I knew there was going to be, definitely a lot of those challenges. I think what really surprised me the most was how much entrepreneurs opened up and were very frank and honest about the challenges they're facing. Even, going so far as to highlight, let's just be honest, discriminatory activities that they experienced, things like that. I definitely knew it existed. I don't think obviously it affects me as much, but just being very impressed by entrepreneurs and the trust, Amanda, that you engendered in people to be able to tell those stories.
But I think they still held back quite a lot.
I think
some of the discriminatory stuff, because it was hard. Some of it was extremely hard. I remember like around Christmas time, I specifically remember it was around the holidays, just being like devastated at the stuff that I was hearing. And like, I feel like everyone who has a more privileged existence needs to hear that kind of stuff, because a lot of people don't believe or appreciate that it's happening, and it happens it happens right in front of us. And oftentimes we're not even acknowledging that other people don't have the same privileges and access to things as we do. And again, like I knew that, but it was still like hard to hear the reality of it over and over and over again. And, I challenge anybody who doesn't believe that to go out and start seeing it, hearing it, looking at it. You can read the report we put out, although nothing too specific went in there to protect people, but people's identities. But, discriminatory actions, like people not being included, people purposefully being excluded, are happening here.
Yep.
And that's something we all have to understand and recognize and confront.
Yep. And so I think that was, again, I think it's just the fact people were willing to share even a tiny bit of that, I think was illuminating. And it's funny when you say that stuff, because you really, if you think back on it, it's probably not, again, that surprising, but to hear those personal stories, to hear the emotion, to hear all of that is a totally different thing, like you're saying. So I think that was a huge thing. I think, something that's always existed in our community and probably will exist for a long time is, what we've classed in our report as a complicated relationship with Mayo Clinic. As someone who's been in that world of inside of Mayo and been outside of Mayo, it is very interesting to hear the dichotomy that exists in the community when it comes to entrepreneurship and Mayo Clinic. That was something that also, I think, was a pretty big issue. And it's funny because we were trying to classify in this report, is this actually negative or is this actually positive? And what we came up with was it's kind of negative and kind of positive. And I definitely think there are some things and perceptions that could be fixed about relationships and attitudes towards larger companies like Mayo in our community. But, let's be honest, a third of the population works for that organization. And by many estimates, 2/3 of the population are feeding off of Mayo in some way, shape, or form. And that's a big driver of our economy. And that's also a super dangerous thing to have in a community. So, just being able to sort of hear a lot of different individuals' opinions and thoughts around that, I think was helpful and illuminating to me, because I've always sort of danced around that issue. And I think now I'm much more willing to have more of an upfront discussion of, and I think quite honestly, after the release of this report, Mayo's willing to have those discussions as well. So I think that leads to a broader discussion we can have, not only about racial diversity, but economic diversity in our community as well. So that was another key thing that I really felt strongly that this report really, really highlighted.
Yeah. So, like you said, we listen to these individuals, and, everyone I talked to, I told them that, they were so willing to give their time. And I remember getting really excited when people would respond when I had had expended all this effort trying to get reach certain people in the community. But every time I met with them, we let them know that their identity was going to be completely anonymous. No one would ever know who I talked to, and that we were going to share this information that we heard, basically to help understand what was working, what wasn't working in the community. So we always had the intention of publicly sharing this information while protecting the identities of everybody that was involved. And so we were also extremely intentional about talking with people that we don't talk to very often, and not just we at Collider, but the ecosystem in general, the leadership in the ecosystem doesn't talk to very often. I think it's fair to say that. So I think out of the 100 people, we talked to only about 13 that were Collider tenants, past or present, or were involved in any sort of programming at all, which isn't that high at all. When you think about at least the role we hope Collider plays in the ecosystem. So that was done about March, which is actually insanely good timing with COVID. I think I did the last three So I was saving some of my Collider contacts to the very end, just in case something happened or I couldn't reach any more people. And I mean, you never thought, the country would go on lockdown, which is what happened. So I think I finished the last 3 or 4 virtually. Some with non-Collider people, but people I just had known prior. And then spent the first 4 to 6 weeks of lockdown sifting through this data, which again was insanely good timing because, we wanted to protect the identities of everybody in this report. So I literally had papers taped up all over the walls in my home office with all this information.
I always imagine that. Do you have a picture of that by any chance?
I did take pictures of it because I wanted to make sure that nothing got lost.
Because I was going to say that, for people listening, I mean, just imagine all of these like serial killer shows where, the detective has this giant, wall of all this stuff where like they're tracking the mafia person. And I just imagine that's what Amanda had on her wall. And it was getting like crazy to the point where, people would probably walk through and say, are you doing okay? Like, are you, should we be worried about your sanity? But, it's amazing. Sometimes you just need to do stuff like that. And I think it's really cool you did.
Yeah, I don't have that much wall space, and I had to make sure it wasn't like behind me when I'd be sitting anywhere because, we were doing other things at that time. I think both of us were on the news a couple times for like other things we were doing. So it's like being extra careful what's behind you in the background. So, but that took a while to go through that data, and, we got some great advice on how to sort through it. And, I think some things to me were surprising. Like, honestly, and this may seem naive, like I knew there'd be, discriminations, but one thing I didn't expect Mayo to be on top of mind of so many people, including so many people who didn't have any connection with that organization at all. That was not something that we set out to learn about, was Mayo's, interaction with the community. We set out to learn more about inclusion and equity. We did not set out to learn more about how a major organization impacted the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Although it did kind of, definitely touch on that. And, something that I probably didn't mention earlier. I mean, when you have 2/3 of a community dependent on one organization, that still leaves 1/3 of your community. And if you break out those numbers of what the average income is of, say a male employee versus someone else in the community, it's drastically different. And I think that also, when you think about equity, you can think about, financial equity. And are these people, are we creating 2 classes in this community? And that's a big issue as well. I mean, it's probably pretty easy for, say, a middle manager at Mayo to start a consulting gig on the side. They can self-fund it. It's easy. It's not as easy for a first-generation immigrant to figure out how they're going to scrape the cash together to put together, a food truck or something like that. Or even, thinking of second-generation people, typically, some of the people we've met in the course of our work here at Collider, thinking about they see what their parents have done and they say, the restaurant's cool, the food truck's cool, the little phone card shop is cool. I've been through the school system here. I want to learn how to code. I want to do that next high growth startup in Minnesota. And, it's just, there are so many more barriers there for those people. So I really do think that income gap is a huge problem in our community that we don't typically talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think a lot of people don't see it. They don't recognize it. So trying to think of what the next. So yeah, we always wanted to share this information with everybody in a de-identified way. So our board for Collider was really great in thinking about how to talk about this information. You know, for those of us who write stuff like this, or even like, I think entrepreneurs listening, you know, you look at something so often that you don't really see, you lose that outside perspective on, is it understandable? You know, does it make sense? Is it going to be impactful? So they were very helpful in thinking about that, helping us think about the right balance of information to share, because there was just so much data to go through that we could sift through this from now until 10 years from now, until it's not even relevant anymore. So we had to get the information out of there that we needed. We ended up focusing on 5 main themes that we heavily heard throughout these conversations, which were that people do use what we're calling community connectors in the ecosystem. These can be, you know, individuals, they could be organizations, and entrepreneurs find these individuals and they use them to connect with other business resources. But then the flip side of that, we also heard a lot of people who can never find these connectors, so they never get connected in. And then, you know, you could argue that we didn't even find those people through these listening sessions because they are so disconnected from the ecosystem. So that was the first thing we heard, was connectors, which was wonderful for our Ecosystem Navigator, that program, because this is basically what they're going to do. The second most common theme was that there are barriers to an inclusive ecosystem and an equitable ecosystem, which again was not surprising. That was part of what we were trying to learn more about. And, you know, there's a lot more information. We put out a public report. We shared this first with service providers in the community, gave them about a week, and then released it to the public. So there's a lot more detail of what kind of discriminatory things we heard, what kind of barriers to inclusivity. So I would encourage everyone to check that out. It's on Collider's website, or you can email us and we'll send it to you too. I might be slightly out of order here, but I think the third most common theme we heard was that relationship with Mayo Clinic. So just that it was complicated, that some people thought Mayo helped the ecosystem, some people felt it hurt the ecosystem. Seemed to be pretty split between people working at Mayo felt that Mayo helped the ecosystem, and people external to Mayo feeling that it hurt the ecosystem. The fourth most common thing we heard was that, I'm definitely missing one in here, trying to think of what it is. So the fourth most common theme we heard was that entrepreneurs, basically, they're asking for more business education. They're asking for help understanding resources. And I'm still missing one. What one am I missing? I have the report right in front of me too. Let's see.
The education one is what I was going to say. You hit that one. And another common thing we heard was that barriers exist in the ecosystem that slow its growth. And that included anti-risk culture, kind of limited connection to students, limited workforce, and difficulty in attracting talent to the community. So those were kind of the 5 major themes we heard from these listening sessions. Like I mentioned, we did share this with our board first. Then we shared it with what we call entrepreneurial support organizations. So that would be anybody that helps a business in some way here in Rochester. So, you know, I'm sure everyone can think of those organizations. So people like DMC, Ready, Diversity Council, the public school systems. So we actually met with them virtually. I think we had 25 or 26 individuals and organizations meet with us on a Monday afternoon. And I was actually a little nervous for that, because I thought that people, I felt pretty confident that we listened to a broad enough and diverse enough segment of people that we had a pretty good overview, but I still thought that people wouldn't believe it. And that was not anything that
was verbalized to us in any manner.
No, I was, excuse me, I was waiting for the defensive mode to kick in, where people are like, "This isn't true. I don't believe this. This is an N of 2. It's ridiculous." Da da da. But everybody was like, "No, that's fair," and we acknowledge it, and hopefully we can build some momentum with that. That's something that we really should be focusing on here in the coming weeks. Is what comes out of that first meeting? Well, as many of us like to say, a second meeting, but I think that we need to really ride that. I think there's a lot of unity and understanding right now due to many, many unfortunate events that have happened. But I think there's definitely that willingness to bring everybody to the table to have those conversations. So it's something we hope to leverage very, very soon. I think we've been very focused on getting our navigators hired. So that's what we're focused on now. But I think that's another thing that once things are going, then it's something that we can really turn more of our time and attention to, because we don't want to lose that either. That was a great moment, and we don't want to let that go to waste, because I think it's so important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because we, through these conversations we had, we basically validated our Ecosystem Navigator program. We validated that people are already using community connectors. A lot of people aren't finding them. We validated that, a lot of leadership doesn't look like the community it's meant to serve. So these navigators really need to understand and ideally come from the community that they're meant to serve. We had thoughts on, I'd say, both, different gender, industry, and demographics that this navigator program would serve. And I think what we started out from changed towards the end of those conversations, where we really decided to focus our pilot Ecosystem Navigator program on women, the African and African American community here in Rochester, and the Latino community here in Rochester, based on the conversations we had, momentum in those communities, programming going on in those communities. So it seemed like a good fit, and emphasizing too, and we've been talking about this a lot, that this is a pilot program with 3 navigators in these communities. They have very limited time that we're able to fund them for. We hope to do more, and we also hope to take this time to gather metrics, gather data, understand how this program is meant to work, and then expand it. So now we're at the exciting activate part.
We have stuff to do. No more research. It's time to apply it.
Time to apply it. So, Jamie, do you want to talk about our navigators and what that's been like?
So, yeah, I mean, initially, as we talked about, we had sort of our plan of 5 navigators, and we realized that for this to be effective, it probably made the best financial sense and the best, let's just be honest, sanity sense from our part to narrow it to 3. So we did decide on having those 3 navigators, and we, again, I don't want to toot our own horn, but I'm going to anyway. What we decided was that these navigators really needed to be patterned, at least in the process and procedures that we've done as community connectors. I thought that that's something that we're experienced in, that we do very, very well. And so, we what was it, a few weeks ago, we released our job posting.
Yeah, I think it was just the beginning of August. Yeah.
Yes, time is so strange right now. But definitely, we just want to look for 3 individuals in the community who are passionate about serving these 3 groups that we've decided that we're going to focus on for this pilot. And finding people that are just willing to listen, to take that time to listen to frustrations maybe some entrepreneurs have, listen very sympathetically to people who are having issues, and trying to find the right connections to help them through that. And that's something that I do on a daily basis. I was just thinking back to my morning, looking at my notebook here. I've done that for 3 people already this morning. I listened to them, and I just got them, connected in where they probably needed for next steps. That's not saying that I'm here to solve their problems. It's just instead of having a whole dartboard to throw a dart at, maybe there's only a dartboard that has, you know, the bullseye and a little bit of the surrounding area. So at least we're getting you near the answer, we hope. So that's really what we envision these ecosystem navigators being, are individuals who are passionate about the communities that they serve, who are well networked, or if they're not, helping to utilize what we've learned through our research to be able to give them a good place to start. And then also understanding what resources are available in the broader community. So all these ecosystem service organizations that we're talking about, getting the navigators to meet with them, to understand where exactly do these, where exactly are the services that each one provides, so that they can really get an understanding of some of the connections they can refer people to. And I always say that, something that these navigators sometimes serve as is what I call a good bartender, right? Someone who's just willing to listen to the pain and trouble that someone's going through. Obviously, we want to try to connect them with resources to make that happen and to overcome that barrier. But sometimes it's just lending an ear too, and letting people know that they're not alone. I think entrepreneurship can sometimes be classed as a very lonely thing. And so letting people know that there's a community out there that wants to help and support them in what they're doing and wants to see them succeed, that's a big thing too. So I think that's really what we would like to see in our navigators. I think we've got some great candidates who we've interviewed already, which is really exciting. And and the biggest thing for me personally, and what these navigators can do, is to teach us, right? Mm-hmm. So we have this worldview that I am coming to learn more and more every day is very narrow and very siloed. And we want them to come back and teach us and help our community really understand maybe some unique perspectives, some unique challenges, whether they're personal challenges or business challenges that these individuals are facing. We want to be, we want to add that to our knowledge here at Collider and disseminate it broadly to the community. Because if a gap isn't, there's a real gap, that's a significant gap that none of our organizations or our community at large is serving, then we need to co-create those answers with our entire community, bringing everyone to the table. And I think that's something that we're very committed to. So being a navigator plays a very crucial role in what we're trying to do culturally here in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Rochester, because we want these individuals to really be our data gatherers, to come back and tell us these things that we probably would never hear. So that's, I think, why I'm excited about our navigators.
Yeah. I would say we have a wonderful advisory board for our Ecosystem Navigator program. They've been, people who've worked in community for years, if not decades, very passionate about community. And I know that they've sent a lot of people to our application. It's kind of stressful when you put something like this out there because, when we first released it, I'm like, no one's going to apply to this. No one's going to apply. And, they've actually made it really, really hard because every single person we talk to could successfully perform this role. I mean, we will be providing like some training as far as resources available, active listening. We're going to do some crises, mental health training for them, which I'm excited to go through myself to learn more. But the quality and compassion of the people who have come forward that want to do this has been really incredible. And I'm really excited I feel like a lot of it's going to be kind of a gut decision in the end of who is chosen. But I feel really happy with who we've spoken to so far. And, this is closing on Friday. But I feel that we have some really great people that can do some really good things here in the community.
Yeah, they've been really fantastic. And that's one thing that, I do love about Rochester is that people by and large care. Sometimes there could be egos or, various things that kind of distract people, but it's a very caring community. And to see the diverse applicants as well has been really, really cool. my biggest worry was we were going to get, again, a bunch of people that look like me apply. And, that's not to say that's necessarily a bad thing, but we really wanted some unique, diverse perspectives to be added to the Collider family. And I think we're going to see some of that. So that's really exciting for me. It really, the biggest challenge going forward for me is I think all of these people can do this job very well. Unfortunately, we only have funding for 15 hours per month, which doesn't seem, at least in my mind, like a lot of time. So we're working really hard to identify other funding sources and hopefully be able to enhance that time. I would love to see it half-time, but that's my personal opinion. I think we have to really understand what the need is and what the capability of each navigator is to paint a sort of realistic picture of what this program can do with the resources that we have. But I think going forward, that's what I would love to see, is just if we could start seeing that within that 15-hour window, we're getting massive engagement, we're getting massive connections to help these entrepreneurs, we're getting big wins as we start to see these businesses prosper and grow, then I think we've proved that it can work. And then I would love to see, it expand beyond the pilot phase, but I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a second. So I won't go too deep into that, but it's definitely, it's a challenge at 15 hours per month. But, I think the positive thing is many times in our community, we would have offered this as just a straight up volunteer position with no pay. And I remember reading an article a year ago, I think, which was a great conversation with someone that said, yeah, you always invite me because I'm an African American to your events, to your panels, to your workshops, but it's always a volunteer thing. Or you're saying, well, you'll get good publicity. They're like, why don't you actually pay me for once? And that was something I remembered when we were writing the grant was, this has to be a paid position. Yes, it's not going to be the best paid position in the world, but for people to take time out of their lives to do this, even if their heart's 100% in it, I think they should be fairly compensated for that. So that's something we've always felt strongly about in this Ecosystem Navigator program.
I would say I think the pay is pretty competitive for the time commitment. So it's just that we didn't have, we wanted to make sure that, the navigators knew that we valued their time to pay them in a good rate. Just we couldn't expand their time commitment.
Right. And we want to get good people too. So, I mean, that hopefully will help with that for sure. But I would love to see the opportunity for us to do more, because I think if you can get really someone engaged in this, half-time or, knock on wood, full-time, I think you're going to make a tremendous difference in the life of many entrepreneurs in our community and our entrepreneurial ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah. So now we're in this activate phase, which is exciting. So the navigators are going to do some training in September through mid-October, and then be out in the community and
release them into the wild.
Release them. And during that time, not during that time, we're with ourselves and our board and our navigators too, when they come online, figuring out the best metrics that they need to be keeping. Everyone hates doing the reporting, but we have to do it. First of all, we have to make sure that they're not going over their time, that they're keeping within their limits. And if not, we have to count it as volunteer hours if it goes over. But also, like we were saying, to get that assessment of the need in the community, understand what's working, what's not working in the community, because we want this to be a continuation of those listening sessions, that these navigators bring back these thoughts of things that are needed. And I know we've talked about that a lot throughout this conversation, but that's the big thing here, is kind of co-creating, designing, having the community design these solutions that they want. We get away from that a lot as a whole. All of our organizations get away from that and doing that top-down approach and throwing something out into the open and expecting that people want it. And a lot of the times they don't. So I think that's a major thing we've taken away from this, even with the education programs we're doing. Like our basics of entrepreneurship class is finishing tonight, and people are filling out a survey. And if they said this was horrible, then we're not doing it again. If they think it was the best thing ever and we should keep it as it is, then it's staying like it is. It's listening to what people want. So I'm excited to get the Navigators out. I'm excited to have them begin their serving process in the community. And, the part that no one likes to do is keeping those metrics, to be able to fund this, expand it, and know that it's working or if it's not. So that's really what we're going to be going into from October. And then this pilot program ends December 2021. So they have 15 months to make an impact here in the community and to start to serve. And many of them have already been doing this work. So it'll really be a major step forward to see this program implemented in another 5 weeks here. So right now we're finishing up working on their training. We're finishing up the interviewing and hiring process, which, like I said, is just, everybody's been so great that it's made it really challenging to narrow it down to 3 people. So I guess we should thank them for making it so hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the rest of this year. If there's a bright spot in this year, this is it for me, is seeing what happens and seeing what comes out of this, and hopefully being able to help even more people in 2021 as this program gets implemented in the community, and we figure out through our navigators how they think this program could best work.
Yeah. And let's be honest, what we think in our, just like the grant and everything we've done so far, what we think is going to work probably is going to need a lot of pivoting and adjusting. But I think my real hope is that at the end of the day, a year from now or whatever, that we have a program that fits the needs of the entrepreneurs. We're getting the right feedback and metrics to prove that. And that we're maybe 6 months down the road with discussions with various organizations about funding not only 3 navigators, but what I call the small army of navigators that serve everyone in the community. So there are various groups we weren't able to make a lot of headway with. So, trying to use similar tactics is probably a weird word to use, but really it's similar tactics to what we've used to break into the 3 communities that we're serving, to do similar things with a broader group of communities here in Rochester, and then work together to be one community and really serve the needs of anyone. So when someone's thinking about starting a business or currently has a business, that they think of what Collider's doing as a very normal first step, to ask a question or to go to. And obviously we could always go to them, but I think that's my big vision, is that there's just these, again, the small army of navigators helping people to navigate issues, connect them to resources. And I think another thing we don't talk about it as much, because I don't think it was really something that was built into this grant, is, we're very fortunate in Rochester to be, I think, at the beginning of something quite special in the community. So I think you're going to see a lot of organizations creating satellite offices here in town. So we want to make sure that our navigators help those groups as well sort of integrate into Rochester, so that they're welcomed immediately, that they're being listened to as well. And they're also learning about all of the great initiatives that are going on and how they can plug their organizations in to help as well. So I think that's another huge thing for our community that might set our community apart from many other communities that are similar size. I think it's a great opportunity. So that's really my sort of grand vision of where this can go. Obviously, we're both scientists at heart, so we've been trained as scientists, so we know that we have to validate this hypothesis first. And I think, so far, I think the data we've gathered says that we've got a pretty good shot that this will work. And now let's make it better and let's grow it. And I think that would be, for me, as someone who came here 15 years ago feeling that they didn't have a connection in the world and couldn't find a connection, I think I would finally be able to say that Rochester is a place where you could show up, you can meet a random stranger in a coffee shop, you can have a conversation with them, and they can point you to Collider or any of other excellent ecosystem organizations in town and say, hey, here's a starting spot where you can get started. I can't tell you how that makes a difference, how much that makes a difference to entrepreneurs. To feel welcome, to feel supported, to feel that they could grow their business in this community versus leaving it for another one. That's a huge deal. And it's something that continues to drive me and hopefully will continue to drive our navigators as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place to end. So I think we're very excited to we're going to make a big deal about introducing the navigators to the community.
Oh, we should have the navigators on a podcast. That's brilliant.
At minimum. But
yeah, part of it for sure.
Yeah. So, cause we want them to tell their story and why they're passionate about this and what they want to accomplish and why this means so much to them. So definitely look for them to be introduced to the community. I'm sure many of you already know some of these people that we've been talking with, I'm sure. So really looking forward to taking this into the next phase, and stay tuned because we will introduce our navigators to you shortly. Thanks so much for listening in, for learning more about our Ecosystem Navigator program. I'm so excited to introduce these individuals to the community in just a few weeks. Like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, applications for our Ecosystem Navigator program are still open, and they'll be open until the end of the day on Friday. So if you're listening in and you're thinking you would be a great fit for this program, or you know somebody who would be a good fit, we encourage them. There's still time to apply. So you can find the application on the Collider website at collider.mn. It's a very simple application. Basically, it's just a cover letter and your resume, and then a conversation with us. So if this sounds like something for you, please take some time and apply today. All right, that's a wrap for us on the podcast today. Please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen in so that you never miss a story of entrepreneurship and innovation coming out of Rochester, Minnesota. We'll see you here next Wednesday with a brand new show.